I don't think we are anywhere close to a time where the US cannot fund itself, but that China can fund itself, or that Russia can fund itself, or that England or Italy or Australia or the Philippines. So in other words, we can get to the point that you're talking about, but to me, that's part of my whole framework. And I hate to keep bringing up the whole milkshake theory because I know people are sick of hearing it, but the whole milkshake theory is predicated on a global sovereign debt crisis. And a global sovereign debt crisis is exactly that. When interest rates rise and governments can no longer issue bonds because of whatever reason, the people don't want to buy them, the interest rates aren't high enough, they no longer trust the government. And so my thesis is that it will be bad for the US, but it will be even worse for the rest of the world. And so while interest rates may go up for the US, and that will cause the US to have run even bigger budget deficits, which crowds out the private sector and causes all kinds of misallocation of capital, I think it happens to an even greater extent around the rest of the world. So, in other words, think of it this way. I think a lot of people, this whole fiscal dominance is now in vogue, right? The U.S. is the interest rates are going to go higher. The U.S. is going to keep running these budget deficits. It's going to crowd out the private sector, and money's going to have to go to fund the treasury that could have been used for more profitable ventures. And so, think about this: people, especially the U.S. fatalists, is what I like to call them. The U.S. fatalists totally understand that the U.S. budget deficit is going to crowd out the private sector in the United States and lead to all kinds of misallocations of capital and bad things in the U.S. But they don't seem to recognize that it's also going to crowd out the funding for the eurodollar market. Again, all of the money in the eurodollar market ultimately comes from the US exporting dollars to the rest of the world. Now, how is it possible that fiscal dominance in the US is going to crowd out private sector in the US, which is closer to the money, but not crowd out the private sector outside the US and not crowd out the public sector outside the United States?
Yeah, good
You
point.
can't have a crowding out in the domestic US dollar market and not also have a crowding out in the international eurodollar market. And that is itself, the crowding out, higher interest rates, which lead to a stronger dollar, which crowds out funding availability in not only the US, but in the rest of the world. That is the milkshake theory.
Yep.
And so it will be bad for everyone.